Emma and Daniel Whitmore arrived at Pine Hollow Retreat, hoping to mend their broken marriage. 5 days later, Daniel was found dead at the bottom of a ravine, and Emma's calm silence became the center of a murder investigation that shocked the nation. Emma and Daniel Whitmore had always looked like the kind of couple others envied. Their social media was filled with travel photos, anniversary dinners, and happy moments that painted a picture of lasting love. But behind the curated snapshots and smiling selfies was a marriage that had been slowly unraveling. For the past 2 years, things had grown tense between them. Long silences replaced laughter, and arguments replaced conversation. Daniel's job in real estate kept him constantly on the phone, while Emma, a pediatric nurse, found herself retreating into long shifts and late-night reading. The spark was gone, and both of them felt it. After a particularly bitter fight in late September, Emma suggested something different, a couple's retreat. She had read about Pine Hollow, a serene therapy retreat hidden deep in the Blue Ridge Mountains. It offered a blend of therapy sessions, nature immersion, and complete disconnection from technology. Phones were collected upon arrival, and guests were encouraged to participate in activities like meditation, hiking, and journaling. It seemed like a perfect escape from the daily grind and a chance to rebuild what had been lost. Daniel, surprisingly, agreed without much resistance. He simply said, "If it'll help, let's do it." They drove up together on a crisp Sunday morning in October. The weather was mild, the leaves just beginning to turn gold and red, and the winding road that led to the retreat was lined with towering trees. Pine Hollow was nestled between two hills, far enough from the nearest town to feel isolated, but close enough for supply runs and emergencies. It was peaceful, a place that looked like it had been built for quiet healing. The first day passed uneventfully. Emma and Daniel were assigned a small cabin with a wood-burning stove and a view of a nearby stream. Their welcome kit included a schedule of therapy sessions, meal times, and group activities. The other couples, 6 in total, ranged from newlyweds to those married for decades. Everyone seemed friendly, even if a bit guarded. There was a shared sense of purpose. Everyone was there to fix something. Emma threw herself into the process. She attended every session, spoke honestly, and kept a journal as instructed by the therapists. Daniel, on the other hand, seemed detached. He participated when asked but remained quiet, distracted, and often seemed more interested in the hiking trails than the emotional work. On the third night, during a group exercise, Emma noticed Daniel sitting alone, staring at the fire pit. His expression blank. Something in his face unsettled her, but she said nothing to be why Thursday. The tension between them had grown again. Staff members later recalled seeing Emma walking the grounds alone, head down, shoulders tense. During one of the final group sessions, she mentioned feeling like she was trying alone. That night, Emma and Daniel skipped the group dinner. No one thought much of it at the time. Couples often needed space. The next morning, everything changed. Daniel's body was discovered at the bottom of a steep ravine near one of the less used trails. It was a staff member, out on an early walk, who spotted something strange in the distance. Upon closer inspection, it was clear Daniel had suffered a severe head injury and wasn't breathing. Emergency services were called immediately. Meanwhile, Emma was found not far from the scene, dazed, silent, and covered in dirt. She told them they had been hiking together when Daniel walked ahead in anger. She claimed she had turned back and only found him later. Her voice was flat. Her eyes were blank. At first, everyone assumed it was a terrible accident. The trails, though scenic, were known to be dangerous. Slippery slopes, narrow turns, and loose rocks made falls possible. But as the hours passed and questions began to emerge, the story began to shift from a tragic accident to something far more unsettling. Emma's account didn't match what little evidence there was. Something wasn't right, and it was only the beginning. The news of Daniel Whitmore's Death spread quickly through Pine Hollow Retreat. What had begun as a peaceful morning was shattered by the appearance of police vehicles and an ambulance on the gravel path. Staff gathered silently near the main lodge, whispering among themselves, unsure of what exactly had happened. By midday, the area near the ravine was cordoned off with yellow tape, and investigators began photographing the scene. The silence of the mountain was replaced with the soft clicks of cameras and murmurs from detectives. Emma sat inside the retreat's small infirmary, wrapped in a blanket, her face pale and distant. She kept repeating the same story. They had gone on a walk early in the morning to clear their heads. There had been an argument. She didn't remember what it was about, but Daniel had grown frustrated and walked ahead. She said she'd stopped to rest, and when she eventually followed the trail, she saw his body down below. She couldn't explain the bruises on her arms or the dirt under her fingernails. She claimed she had fallen trying to climb down to him, but the staff nurse noticed that the scratches on her hands didn't match a fall. They looked more like scrapes from grabbing onto something or someone. The detective on scene, Elise Hartman, didn't jump to conclusions. Her job was to collect facts, and so far, there weren't enough. The ravine where Daniel was found was steep, but not especially high. It was possible someone could fall, hit their head, and die. But something didn't sit right with her. The medical examiner, who arrived later that day, shared her hesitation. The impact marks on Daniel's skull were severe, too localized for a fall of that height. There were bruises on his forearms that looked like he'd tried to shield himself. The ground at the top of the slope was undisturbed. No signs of slipping, no scattered leaves or broken twigs. It looked more like someone had pushed him. That evening, police retrieved Daniel's belongings from the cabin. His phone was missing, which was strange because Daniel was known to be attached to it. A short search turned it up in the woods, about 30 feet from the trail. It had been powered off and tucked under a pile of leaves. Someone had gone to the trouble of hiding it. Back at the local sheriff's office, Detective Hartman began combing through Daniel's recent activities. His last known texts were to someone named Lacey, a contact saved without a last name. The tone of the messages was personal, intimate, even. There were references to getting away, to not telling her yet, and one message that simply said, "After this retreat, I'll be free." That single sentence shifted the direction of the investigation. Emma, meanwhile, remained at the retreat under supervision. She hadn't asked to go home, hadn't made any calls, and seemed oddly detached from the reality of her husband's death. When detectives questioned her again, they noticed small inconsistencies in her story. She first said they hiked in silence. Then she said they argued about dinner plans. She couldn't recall what trail they were on, even though the retreat only had a few mapped paths. Her clothes had dirt on the back, suggesting she had been on the ground at some point. But she hadn't mentioned falling or sitting anywhere. What troubled the investigators most was the complete lack of emotion. Emma didn't cry. She didn't ask what had happened to Daniel's body. When asked if she wanted someone to call her family, she said no. A grief counselor tried to speak with her, but she refused. It wasn't shock, it was emptiness. The retreat's peaceful image was shattered. Guests whispered about what they'd seen or heard. One woman claimed she saw Emma walking alone near the cliff's edge the evening before the body was found. That detail didn't match the timeline Emma had given. Slowly, piece by piece, the illusion of a tragic accident began to fall apart. Something darker had taken place on that mountain. Something premeditated. Detectives returned to Pine Hollow the next morning with a clearer purpose. What had once been treated as a tragic accident was now officially under investigation as a suspicious death. They began by speaking with every guest, staff member, and therapist at the retreat. Most people hadn't seen or heard anything unusual. But one woman, a retired teacher named Joyce, remembered something strange. On Thursday evening, just before sunset, she had taken a walk near the cliffside loop. She noticed Emma sitting alone on a rock near the edge, staring down at the ravine. Joyce waved, but received no acknowledgement. Emma didn't even turn her head. Joyce hadn't thought much of it at the time, but after learning about Daniel's death, the memory took on a new weight. Investigators found Emma's journal in her cabin. At first glance, it looked like routine therapy notes, reflections on her marriage, frustrations with Daniel, scattered thoughts about her own unhappiness. But as they flipped through the pages, the tone changed. The final entry, dated the day before Daniel's death, read, "I can't do this anymore. He's not the person I married. I don't want to be trapped forever." That line was underlined 3 times. On the same page was a sketch of the hiking trail, with the edge of the cliff circled. They also found a torn note in the trash, likely from a group exercise Emma had refused to participate in. Staff were asked to write what was holding them back, fold the paper, and toss it anonymously into a basket. Emma never handed hers in. The pieces were recovered and carefully taped together. The message read, "He's ruining me. If he disappeared, everything would be better." Meanwhile, Daniel's phone revealed even more troubling evidence. Digital forensics confirmed he had been exchanging romantic messages with Lacey Miller, a fellow real estate agent from Phoenix. Their affair had begun months earlier, and according to the texts, Daniel had promised to end things with Emma after the retreat. There was even a draft email to Emma that had never been sent, titled, "We Need to Talk." The timing suggested he planned to break the news during their final session. Daniel also mentioned in one message that he had just updated his life insurance. The policy had doubled, and Emma was the only listed beneficiary. The change was made 2 weeks before their trip. When detectives contacted the insurance company, they confirmed Emma had already called the day after Daniel's death to ask about the claim process. All of this began to paint a disturbing picture. A failing marriage, a secret affair, a large life insurance policy, and a retreat that promised solitude and seclusion. The perfect setting for a calculated crime. Investigators requested security footage, but Pine Hollow had no cameras on the trails. The only footage available was from a stationary camera at the main entrance, showing Daniel and Emma leaving the cabin together early Friday morning. It was the last time he was seen alive. The autopsy report solidified suspicions. Daniel's skull had been fractured by a blunt object before he went over the cliff. The angle and depth of the wound suggested a deliberate blow, not a fall. There was no alcohol or drugs in his system, and there were no defensive injuries on Emma, only dirt and shallow scratches. The forensic team concluded Daniel had been struck from behind and then pushed over the edge. At this point, Emma was brought in for formal questioning. She maintained her story but now seemed nervous, unsure, constantly adjusting the details. Her calm demeanor had given way to vague responses and long pauses. When asked directly about Daniel's affair, she said she had a feeling but denied knowing any specifics. When asked about the insurance policy, she insisted it was Daniel's idea and that she hadn't thought about the money. The investigators weren't convinced. Too many details didn't add up. Emma had motive, opportunity, and a growing amount of circumstantial evidence against her. What had started as a quiet attempt to save a marriage had turned into the backdrop for a carefully staged death. The deeper they looked, the more it seemed Emma hadn't come to the retreat for healing. She had come with a plan. As the investigation moved forward, detectives turned their attention to Emma's digital footprint. Though she had turned in her phone as required by the retreat's rules, data recovery specialists were able to retrieve browser history and deleted content from the cloud. What they found only deepened the mystery and sharpened the suspicions against her. A series of internet searches in the weeks leading up to the retreat painted a chilling picture. Emma had looked up phrases like how to stage a hiking accident, blunt force trauma causes, and how long does it take to process life insurance claims after a spouse's death. These searches weren't spread out over months. They were all made in the same 4-day window before the trip to Pine Hollow. Even more telling were several maps saved to her phone, all highlighting the same trail where Daniel had died. She had studied the topography, looked at visitor photos, and zoomed in on the edge of the ravine from different angles. It became increasingly clear to detectives that Emma had not arrived at the retreat with hope for reconciliation. She had arrived with knowledge of a very specific location and a very specific outcome. Back at the retreat, detectives interviewed a part-time staff member named Colin, who remembered a tense moment between Emma and Daniel on the second night of the retreat. He had seen them walking away from the group activity, Daniel looking frustrated while Emma trailed behind with her arms crossed. Colin didn't hear what was said, but something about the body language stuck with him. He had written it off as a lover's quarrel at the time, but now it felt significant. More evidence continued to surface. In a cabin trash bin, police found the cardboard packaging of a heavy flashlight that wasn't listed on the cabin's inventory. The flashlight itself was recovered near the trail where Daniel was killed, buried beneath a layer of pine needles. Forensics confirmed it had traces of Daniel's blood and fragments of hair. It was likely the weapon used to deliver the fatal blow. There were no fingerprints, but it had clearly not been there long. Meanwhile, Emma's bank activity revealed a purchase of that exact flashlight model from a camping supply store 3 days before the trip. When questioned, she claimed it was for safety, in case they wanted to hike at night. But records showed they had never once joined a night hike, and Emma herself had told group leaders she didn't feel comfortable walking after sunset. With mounting evidence, the case against Emma became difficult to dismiss. Her carefully constructed image of a grieving wife was unraveling. When the prosecution team reviewed the case, they saw a clear pattern: motive rooted in financial gain and betrayal, opportunity created by isolation, and planning evident through digital traces and physical evidence. What they didn't have was a confession, but they didn't need one. Emma was arrested 2 weeks after Daniel's death. Her mugshot made headlines, and the story quickly gained national attention. Media outlets called it the therapy retreat murder, and pundits debated whether Emma had snapped or plotted. Some portrayed her as a woman pushed to the edge, emotionally abandoned and betrayed. Others saw her as cold, calculated, and methodical. During pretrial hearings, Emma's defense team pushed back hard, arguing that the evidence was circumstantial. They claimed she had no history of violence, that Daniel's affair had deeply hurt her, and that the trip was truly meant to heal, not harm. They questioned the reliability of the staff's recollections and downplayed the relevance of the online searches, calling them morbid curiosity. But behind the courtroom drama, the truth had already begun to settle in the minds of those closest to the case. The image of Emma alone on that trail, flashlight in hand, rehearsing every step in silence, had become impossible to ignore. Her face may have shown calm, but the path she walked up that mountain spoke of something else: intent. In the end, it wasn't just Daniel's secrets that had led them there. It was hers. Hidden beneath her silence, masked by sadness, was a plan quietly set in motion long before anyone ever stepped foot in those woods. Emma Whitmore's trial began 6 months after Daniel's death. The courtroom was packed with journalists, curious, locals, and legal observers drawn to the case's mix of betrayal, murder, and the eerie backdrop of a mountain retreat meant for healing. The prosecution built its narrative carefully, piece by piece, presenting Emma not as a heartbroken wife, but as a woman who had orchestrated her husband's death with chilling precision. They started with motive. Daniel's affair with Lacey Miller had been well documented through texts and emails. The prosecution emphasized how he had planned to leave Emma and had expressed this intention clearly in messages to his mistress. They then introduced the life insurance policy that Daniel had doubled just weeks before the trip. Emma had been named the sole beneficiary, and her quick attempt to contact the insurance company following his death was used to underscore the idea that she had been thinking about the money, not mourning the loss. Then came the evidence of planning. The jury was shown Emma's internet search history, which included disturbing queries on how to stage an accident, where to strike someone for maximum damage, and how long it takes to collect life insurance money. These searches had been made just days before the retreat. The heavy flashlight, found near the scene and confirmed as the murder weapon, matched the model she purchased before leaving for Pine Hollow. Though the defense argued it was for general safety, the flashlight had never been used during their stay until the moment it was used to end Daniel's life. The prosecution also presented physical evidence: the trail map sketches in Emma's journal, the torn note confessing her desire for Daniel to disappear, and the autopsy report showing a single, deliberate blow to the head prior to the fall. It was not a slip, they argued, but an execution hidden behind the illusion of an accident. The defense team tried to counter every point. They insisted that Emma's behavior after the death was a result of trauma and shock, not guilt. They challenged the timeline of events, suggesting the absence of eyewitnesses created reasonable doubt. They said the flashlight could have been used by someone else and questioned the accuracy of the staff members' memories from that weekend. Most importantly, they painted Emma as a deeply hurt woman betrayed by her husband, suggesting that any planning she might have done was rooted in fantasy, not intent.